you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good to see your hat there.
Oh yeah. Well, the alternative is you guys looking at me folding laundry and looking kind of gross. But I wanted to say, like, I know that one thing that's been on all of our minds this week is what happened at the Capitol building, and um, to put a small spin on that, a lot of my students came to class having been to their history classes, which are taught by Rennell Ellis and Ed Calkins, and they did an amazing job of processing that with our students and talking about what it means to be a patriot and respecting the history and the culture of our nation. And even though I'm sure that we have students that, whose parents may have, wanted to be there or something, they talked about, if your side loses, you have sportsmanship and you have respect for the institution. And the students came away with, I think, a greater sense of patriotism than they started with. And I was really proud of that in our little school, for them to share that with our kids and give them a sense of what it means to be an American and also a person with sportsmanship. So that's a bit of a joy in a sad time.
Yes, thank you for that.
Victor, would you light a candle, please, for Janelle and Phil as a congratulations to their retirement?
I certainly will. Congratulations, Phil and Janelle.
I need to tag on to Julianne's comments. I just have to say that I've been struggling between a humongous anger and some level of hope. I've had to work real hard on my guardrails. I've gone back to Doug Hammarskjöld and his quotes I've done here before, and looking at the different kinds of leadership that can be invoked in difficult circumstances. Perhaps we can talk about that at some other time, but I'm terribly concerned about how we're going to get from this place to a better place.
All right, so here's a candle for hoping we get to a better place. Thank you.
Victor, just wanted to let you know that we appreciate all the condolences.
All the condolences?
On their retirement.
Oh, sure. Oh, that must have been Phil. Sure thing, Phil.
Hi, Victor, this is Shannon. If you could light a candle, I think, for our Wyoming politicians. They start their legislative session on Tuesday. It may also end on Tuesday. It may continue. We're not quite sure what exactly will happen. But if folks don't know, there was also some incidents last week at our Capitol here in the state. Some fake blood was spilled on the lawn of our state Capitol, and somebody drove a vehicle right near the administrative building, and it got lit on fire. So also some concerning things happening here in the state too.
Well, thank you for letting us know that.
So I would like to light a candle of concern. During the protests, I feel like if you're Jewish or a person of color, you would be so insulted by what happened. The man that had a t-shirt that said that not enough Jews were killed in Germany, and officers that are letting protesters, rioters pass by in comparison to what they did during peaceful Black Lives Matter. I just feel for people that are going through that and light a candle for them, please.
Thank you.
Victor,
Yes.
wasn't sure you could hear. I would appreciate it if you'd light a candle for me. I think for each and all of us, we just have to resist that temptation to discount and other those with whom we so strongly disagree.
Amen to that one.
Victor, I'd like you to pile on with another candle, I guess, for optimism and hope.
You bet.
You know, I think back in my short span on this planet and this country, and the most traumatic thing I remember is the Vietnam War era, which pretty much tore the country apart.
Yes.
And it was marred by lots of violence and mass protests and all sorts of weird juju. Going back further, obviously the Civil War, and just our country has a history of fairly traumatic things, but yet here we are. Somehow it seems like as a country, we've been able to find our way back, at least to temporary periods of relative calm and, dare I say, harmony. And I'm optimistic and hopeful that that will be the case with this situation as well. Time will tell.
We are all hoping so. At least all of us in this fellowship are. Are there other joys and concerns? If not, I will light one final candle for joys and concerns unexpressed, but felt in the heart. I somehow foolishly closed my storybook, so I have to look to find it. And maybe while I'm finding it, you can, if you have a little one in your house, you can invite them to come and hear the story. The story is called The Night Bird, and it comes from Russia. Are there any young ears present?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Who am I talking to?
Emmett.
Nice to see you, Emmett. I'll be interested in hearing what you have to say about this story and how you think this story connects with things that are going on in our country right now, and with anything else that you want to talk about. The story is called The Night Bird. Long ago, in the Russian forests and steppes, or fields, the Roma people traveled far and wide in separate groups. They camped in the forests and fields and made their fortunes in the villages that they visited. Life was good when they were on the road and on their own. Life was good unless one group of Roma ran into another. Then the chiefs were quick to disagree about everything, and especially about territory. The disagreements led to insults. The insults turned into fistfights. And before long, one and then another young man would die. When Mircea was a small boy, he heard the wagons of the other Roma bands, and then he retreated into the folds of his mother's skirts, and he begged her not to let them fight. She shrugged her shoulders. What could she do? Barrow Shero was the chief. She had no say. When Mercia was a little older, he grabbed hold of his father and the other men and begged them not to fight. They shrugged their shoulders. What could they do? It was Barrow Shero who demanded they fight. They had no say. When Mercia was a young man, he approached the leaders of the other bands and begged them not to fight. They laughed at him and asked whether he really was a man. The fighting and unnecessary deaths were just a part of life, and nothing they could change. Mercia's sorrow grew until finally he could stand it no more. He bid farewell to his family and disappeared somewhere deep in the forest. No amount of calling or searching could bring him back. He was gone. Mercia had always been a gentle soul, but now, alone in the forest, he grew bitter. Why had they not listened to him? Alone in the forest, he grew angry. He died. And in his place came a night bird with a haunting call. Some years later, Mercia's band returned to the place where he had disappeared. It felt eerie and ominous and scary there, and yet they set up their camp in the clearing. That evening, when the chores had been done and the campfire burned, no one sang or danced. They huddled by the fire without saying a word. It was a young boy who first came to hear the night bird call. It seemed to be calling him. He felt he had no choice as he followed the sound of the bird into the forest. By the time his family realized he was gone, it was too late. They couldn't find him. All wanted to leave the place, and yet there was something that made them stay. The next night, they huddled around the fire in silence again. It was a youth who heard the night bird call. Now it was calling him. He felt mesmerized as he followed the sound of the bird into the forest. By the time his family realized he was gone, it was too late. The next day, everyone wanted to leave that bleak place, but Barrow Shero, the chief, would not or could not budge. He sat all day long with his chin in his hands. That evening, when the campfire burned, everyone could hear the night bird call. Shero jumped up. It is for me that the night bird calls. It has been after me all along, and it is I who must go. I am sorry for my warring ways. I have done wrong. The night bird calls for peace. When I go, so too shall our warring ways. Barrow Shero walked off into the forest, never to be seen again. After that, as though it were a catchy fiddle tune, peace spread throughout the land. The Russian Roma people began to live in harmony with one another. Since then, the night bird has continued to call, but its call is no longer hypnotic. Its call is just a reminder of Shiro's pledge for peace. Let's hope that the night bird's call will continue to be heard today, and that the leaders all around the world will hear it. Perhaps we can call with it. So, Emmett, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
So, what do you think that night bird represents? What do you think it is, besides a bird?
I think the night bird represents like the people who are like doing what's right in the world.
What is right?
Like making
Thank you,
peace.
Emmett. That was a very fine answer. I much appreciate that. Okay. I am now going to turn it over to Ian, who has some words of meditation for us.
The meditation today is by Alice Anachika Nassaman. In a world so filled with brokenness and sorrow, it would be easy to lose ourselves in never-ending grief, to be choked by our outrage, to be paralyzed by the enormity of suffering, to feel our hearts squeezed tight with hopelessness. Instead, this morning, let us simply breathe together as we hold our hearts open. Breathing in as our hearts fill with compassion. Breathing out as we pray for healing in our world and in our lives. Breathing in, opening ourselves to the transforming power of love. Breathing out as we pray for peace in our world and in our lives. Breathing in as we hold hope in our hearts. Breathing out as we pray for justice in our world and in our lives. May we know our strength. May we be filled with courage. May our love flow from us into this world. Breathing in, we are the prayer. Breathing out, we are the healing. Breathing in, we are the love. Breathing out, we are the peace. Breathing in, we are the hope. Breathing out, we are the justice. May we know our strength. May we be filled with courage. May our love flow from us into this world. Amen. Blessed be. May it ever be so. Well, thanks everybody. for being here today. Here, let me pull up my talk. I'll admit this was hard for me to write. I kind of had a week where I perpetually woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and then Wednesday happened. But I'm really glad to be here with you today, and thank you for giving me a chance to explore the fascinating topic of authority. What a week. The need for us to grapple with the issue of authority is very concrete after Wednesday's events on Capitol Hill. We are angry about the disrespect. Why has it come to this? Where does the responsibility lie? What fundamental aspects of humanity and society can we discover by examining this mess? How can we grow, and what can we do to help make things better? Discussing authority on the level of society and the state seems a fitting starting point in investigating the traumatic events we saw take place this week in Washington. I feel that it will also be necessary to frame the discussion of authority more broadly, from granular personal experience up through the societal and on to the cosmic plane of consistency. Authority acts as an organizing principle that can help us make meaning in the present. Authority exists upon all these levels, I argue, as the process by which consciousness regulates trauma. Trauma, as I use the term here, is a deeply disturbing experience. And my implication is that the discongruity and danger inherent in the world makes trauma a fundamental aspect of reality, to which the sustained response is the flourishing of life. For individuals, the mind's executive function commands the self. We know our own needs and compel ourselves through acts of will to do what needs to be done in order to live. At the outer limit of this paradigm of internal authority is the understanding we hold about our own mortality. In a cosmic sense, the process of entropy gives the universe an aspect of impermanence, albeit on a literal astronomical scale. Over the course of the eons, patterns of matter and energy have ordered themselves into life, vibrant and aware. The patterns and processes by which life has formed and evolved are a direct response to the trauma which entropy visits upon the universe. The mystery of life's presence could well be described as an obedience to creation's authority, ordering the stars to burn and life to arise. The term authority can be used in various ways. In the primary societal sense, authority, quote, can be vested in persons or hierarchical offices, end quote, by people who acknowledge the right of said authority to make decisions on their behalf. This is according to 20th century political theorist and philosopher Hannah Arendt. It is the people themselves who vest an authority with power by giving to the government the right to command their obedience. This investiture requires the active respect of the population for the authority to have its ability to rule. Arendt contrasts power starkly with violence. Governments gain their authority from the power inherent in the population. But if the people no longer trust and respect the government, its authority is severely undermined. When a state in this position resorts to using violence in order to compel obedience, it erodes its authority further. Totalitarian states are feared by their subjects, but not respected. It's for this reason that they compel their citizens to shower their leaders with laud and praise, and why they cannot abide any derisive or comedic representation of the dear leader. As Arendt says, the greatest enemy of authority is contempt, and the surest way to undermine it is laughter. In every society, however, authority seems to be unavoidably entangled with violence. The needs of the group easily eclipse the tender needs of an individual's heart. This is where my argument that authority functions to regulate life's trauma begins to manifest. There is a complex interplay between the ways in which authority must engender the respect of the people while simultaneously requiring the instrumentation of violence to dominate those people who are perceived to disrespect the power and authority of the state. This interplay is age-old, and the paradox may be intrinsic to our nature. Humans have evolved an indomitable spirit in order to overcome the fundamental trauma of our existence, the consciousness of our own mortality. Our individual rebellious spirits allow us to rise to life's challenges, and yet we only succeed by working collectively. We organize ourselves and seek to achieve the best result for the group, but inevitably the decisions of the group cannot accommodate the needs of every individual. Living in a society then has bred in us a deep anxiety over being cast out of the band. The need to belong is central to the development of shared beliefs. And within any worldview, there is an ongoing development of the group's beliefs concerning those in authority. The government only holds authority as long as society on the whole believes that it is deserving of respect. A broad variety of ideological perspectives are actively criticizing the United States government, and some of the criticism is extremely valid, while some of it is based in elaborate fantasy. So who then is the authority on what is true? A different meaning of the word. To be an authority on something means to have a commanding knowledge of the subject. But most of us seem to think we know what is true. A shared sense of belonging within a community, the nexus of inherited values and common perspectives creates our reality. Our in-group is the authority on what is true because we give them the respect, the power to make the decisions on what is for us. And we don't like being told that we're wrong. It does not come naturally for us to undertake a paradigm shift in our understanding of reality. Losing faith in something is painful. This is, at least in part, I think, the reason why science's insistence on centering doubt and dealing in probabilities rubs many people the wrong way. The vast, vast majority of people who accept the benefits brought about by the exercise of scientific thinking do not live their lives in a scientific manner, but instead cling to cultural patterns which, common sense tells them, are just how things must be done. And sometimes research might bear these common sense truths out. But when bold scientists call out our long-held assumptions, casting doubt on long-held practices, it is often the cause of great consternation and is certainly not the best way to win someone's respect. For many Americans today, despite their reliance on the fruits of the scientific project, scientists are not respected as authorities. So why are we facing a culture which rejects authority? Our democratic government is structured to meet the needs of society. In some ways it succeeds, and in other ways it fails. But despite its flaws, in terms of corruption, an analytical assessment of our system by Transparency International finds the US to be ranked 23rd out of 198 countries in the world. Well, that shows that we certainly are not the shining city on the hill. Being placed in the 88th percentile, tied with France, is a far cry from the superlative language, most corrupt ever. So the story about our government's unacceptable corruption, like the rejection of science, originates in beliefs not centered in analytic assessment of reality. There is a mechanism in society which has always played upon the periphery of authority, both providing it with vital energy, but dangerous to authority in that its dynamics are prone to destabilize centers of power. The postmodern metaphysician Gilles Deleuze termed this concept the war machine. Now, the concept of a machine in this view is something that functions within a system. One's own rebellious nature to go against established norms is the war machine within the strata of one's self. Within society, the creation of conspiracy theories online seems to be an example where the war machine facilitates the development of a shared belief, a sense of belonging organized around the rejection of established authority. The nature of the war machine is to remain exterior to any established social structure. I feel like we all saw the war machine at work on Wednesday. To quote Deleuze, "It should not be concluded that war is a state of nature, but rather that it is a mode of a social state which wards off and prevents the state." End quote. I know that's really heady stuff, so let me read the quote one more time. "It should not be concluded that war is a state of nature, but rather that it is a mode of a social state which wards off and prevents the state." And I think he's referring to the state here with a capital letter, roughly analogous to what I'm referring to as authority, which Hannah Arendt would say, we the people vest with the power to take charge in the state. So this is indeed what Trump's insurrectionists did, at least for a short chilling time on Wednesday afternoon. They prevented the state from functioning. I believe that the war machine within our society emanates from collective trauma. Individuals perceive that the state's authority is unable to address their trauma and may even be to blame. Whatever the validity of this perception, the loss of respect for authority is very real. The trauma experienced by radical Trump supporters is perceived to be caused by the left generally. And make no mistake, the trauma they're experiencing is pathological, but that doesn't mean that it hurts them any less. The experience of finding your world devoid of meaning is distressing. And accepting responsibility for creating one's own meaning is far more taxing than allowing oneself to be subsumed into a culture which validates your distress and absolves you by placing the blame for the situation upon the shoulders of the authorities, government, scientists, the media, universities. For an individual, the pain of one's existence seems completely unimportant to the state. We are the authorities on ourselves, but if we know ourselves to be broken, the hurt experienced in the midst of society might engender a mistrust in authority. Knowledge, whether it be the news reported from the media or the development of new knowledge in the sciences, knowledge is viewed with contempt through the broken lens of a traumatized individual who has chosen to blame society for that trauma and reject established authority. So what can we do to help make things better? I must admit that it seems hard to have compassion for people who are so disrespectful of others. In order to care for someone, however, we must first ensure our own well-being as individuals and in fellowship. The metaphor of securing our own oxygen mask before assisting others comes to mind. Over the course of the last few years, I have often experienced the ongoing cycle of conversations revolving around the latest outrage which Trump and his supporters have perpetrated. This pattern's not healthy. It holds the dangerous potential of feeding a sense of ego that makes us feel superior to people who, while dangerous, are victims of their own inability to deal with the trauma they've experienced in life. What we might do instead is focus those energies on the work of helping grow a more vibrant community. And we must respectfully stand up for the authority of duly elected officials and the scientific understanding of human health and the well-being of society and the planet. Doing so without anger coloring the interaction, I admit, is a balance I do not feel that I have walked very well at times. That likely means that my own trauma is something I need to take the time to better understand. I need to secure my own oxygen mask first. Thank you.
For all that is our life, we sing our
So we will now invite people to remember that we require donations to keep the fellowship going. And so this is just a reminder to please use the Tithely or send a check to Ramona Stein according to the information in the order of service to help our fellowship thrive. And if you'll join me with me now in blessing the offering. Let this be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is so sacred to many of us, a community of memory and hope, for we are the keepers of the dream.
Well, I hope that was coherent. I'd be glad to have any discussion.
Ian, can you hear me?
Very well.
I just like to thank you for your presentation. I'll have to reread it in order to digest it better. But I was sitting here, one of my distractions was thinking how wonderful and gratifying it is to sit here in this small community and have a presentation focused on the events of a few days ago in a supportive and coherent community. What a luxury that is, and how important, I think I speak for many, but how important it is to have this community to share our feelings and help us find our way. So I thank you for a significant contribution to that.
Well, thank you, Janet. I'll tell you what, this one wasn't as much fun to write.
I believe you.
I'd like to say a couple of things that probably surprises you. I wanted to speak to our theme in that we talked about leadership and authority. And I'm familiar with a book called Primal Leadership. It's by Daniel Goleman, the emotional intelligence guy. And he has 6 styles of emotional leadership that he writes about in Primal Leadership. And the first one, which it's a different take on authority. He calls that a visionary leader, the authority one. And people using authority leadership style are inspiring. They move people toward a common goal, tell their teams what they're all doing. They're all going to try to do, but now they're going to get there. And he leaves it up to them to figure out how to get there. And empathy is the most important aspect of authoritative leadership, according to him. The other end of the spectrum is autocratic, and I'd like leadership. And I think that's something we've been experiencing. I struggle, I told you, with anger and my hope. And I think my hope is fed by thoughts that I wrote after our 2012 election to Doug. And I'd like to quickly say that civility does not equal weakness. Assertiveness and firmness can be expressed without being aggressive. Kindness, decency, and respect are not reflections of naivete. Gentleness is a form of strength, and compromise does not equal losing. If one can describe rather than judge another's point of view, 3 things are more likely to happen. First, you will better understand. Second, the other will experience being heard without judgment. Third, both of you will be more likely to remain engaged in a conversation that has a higher probability of a positive outcome for both of you. Like Susan Scott said in her book, Fierce Conversations, each conversation is the relationship in the moment of its occurrence. That's my paraphrase. The takeaway, this applies whether the conversation, quotes, is one conversation with a store clerk or the conversation that is carried over a lifetime with a spouse. I hope our electorate, starting with me, and our leaders will consider applying some of these ideas. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. I think that's perfect. You know, being both gentle and assertive, for me personally, that's a tricky balance, and I find myself getting frustrated. And I think that's why I mentioned my own, seeking to find the way through that, because, it's easy to leave a bad interaction where you alienated someone else with your anger, thinking, gosh, I didn't make the world a better place in the last 10 minutes, did I? And even though that's, maybe not the lion's share of interactions, it doesn't take too many angry clashes with people to feel like, to feel pretty discouraged. I appreciate that. Yeah, like specific advice on how to keep your cool when someone's talking crazy.
Are you talking to me?
Uh-huh.
One good thing is keep your mouth shut. Take a breath. And Joe helped me with this one the other day, as to say something like, tell me more about that. Tell me more about what your thinking is so I can better understand. That makes me crazy to have to do that sometimes, because I want to sometimes smack them alongside the head and get their attention, but that's not the way to go, obviously. So I would say that take a breath, keep your mouth shut in the process, and then say something like that. Tell me more about it so I can better understand your position.
Thanks, Bruce.
So I'd like to make a comment. Thank you, Ian, for a very thoughtful presentation. I appreciate your reminding us of Hannah Arendt's work. Of course, she was a victim of the Nazi Holocaust and devoted her life to trying to understand authoritarianism. But what struck me the most about your talk was this idea of trauma and authority, and how people who are disenfranchised, they are not going to find appeal or trust authority, right? They have to rebel because their needs are not being met. And as you talked about that, it made me remember that the people who are engaged in various levels of rebellion are broken people, are people who in some sense have been traumatized. And for me, that is a helpful way to think about what's going on, that beneath the violence, there's actually hurt and pain, and what's the word for people who lack meaning, ennui. We have to be, it's hard to do, but we need to be compassionate. I think if that's your message, I think
absolutely
your message came across to me is that we have to actually muster compassion for broken people. Is that kind of what you were saying in part?
Yes, and I think I appreciate Bruce's words too there on like specifics on how to engage that compassion with maturity in the face of this really challenging next however many years or decades of this, which is probably going to be all of our whole lives. we don't know how bad it's going to be, but it's certainly not going away anytime soon. And yeah, thank you, Victor.
Ian, this is Catherine. I found your message to be very powerful, and it seems like all week I've been comparing what's going on to what happens at recess when I have trying to teach young children not to lie, not to get mad when they lose, etc. And I have a lot of empathy in my heart, but it's just like children who have a really horrible start in their life, they have trauma in their life. We have to find ways to help them to succeed and not always fall back on that. And that's how I feel about the protesters. They're, you know, whatever their deal is, it's really hard for me to have empathy for them. And one of the greatest things I have against our current president is he has zero empathy for anybody. I know I'm rambling, but it's a pretty emotional subject.
No, you're fine. I think that's part of this that's the most confusing. When I looked up trauma, I saw, you know, then in the description of the symptoms that people suffer after a traumatic event, you know, confusion, depression, anxiety, right? And I feel like, gosh, that describes how a lot of us are feeling over the last several years, but especially since Wednesday. This is confusing. And when you realize that there's someone there who is so callous in his use of power, you know, abuse of power, that it's really damaging. So, you know, it's kind of a tricky spot to be in. How do we take care of each other?
In Doug Hammarskjöld's markings, he said, Hammarskjöld points out that Narcissus is not a victim of vanity. His fate is that of someone who responds to his sense of unworthiness with defiance. It just said a lot to me.
Ian?
Mm-hmm.
Not sure how to articulate this, and I might be sort of swimming upstream here. Maybe I'm channeling our good friend Robert. But one of the things I think you talked about, if I understood correctly, is this sort of process of grievance and disenfranchisement, and it leads to this frustration and lack of respect for authority. I guess it's essentially the tear it down mentality. You just don't care about authority or respect it anymore. I know today you were focused on the events of this last week. I guess my question is, do those sort of thought processes, do they apply across the political spectrum?
Yeah, I one of the things that struck me as I was writing this, and I may have started a little late. I kind of had a rough week, so I didn't really sit down to begin this until yesterday afternoon, but I thought, gosh, this reminds me so much of what I'm saying, reminds me of what people were feeling in the 60s, you know? It was coming from a really different direction, but the sort of underlying wound is almost analogous to what young people were feeling in the 60s, you know? Like they weren't being cared for by society. And as they perceived it, that fault lay firmly on the shoulders of those in power, and they lost respect for authority. And, you know, I don't want to like make too much of the comparison, but I think it's pretty clear. And so that's, I guess, like I hope part of my message was really clear that, you know, what we do need to do is we need to take care of each other. What we don't need to do is spin our wheels tearing these people down. You know, just imagine being in the shoes of someone who, you know, got their kicks by griping about the hippies, right? Like, oh, they're not doing any good to anybody. They're just, you know, getting off on complaining about the long hairs. Well, you know, it didn't do anybody any good. And maybe if they had taken some more time to have some compassion for where the youth were coming from and what the struggle was, maybe we wouldn't be in this boat right now. So it you know, not to oversimplify it, but if the shoe's on the other foot now, as progressives, people who believe in liberal democracy, but also don't want to see, you know, militarism running rampant across the world, we've got a really narrow road to walk to both ask our system to improve and have a lot of compassion for the people who are, you know, feeling like they don't matter anymore. Because
Well,
they
I
do matter, everybody matters.
I do want to say that I really appreciated your closing line, you know, and it's just sort of necks it down to the localest level possible is just make sure you've got your own oxygen mask on. I'll remember that line.
Okay.
I don't think that compassion is incompatible with anger or with punishment, especially in a case like this. I think that you can say, yeah, I can understand where you're coming from. And also, at this moment, there needs to be some consequence. This needs to not be okay. Which I think I've said similar things at different talks before, but it's something that I always think is really important. Compassion is not incompatible with anger and consequences.
Here. Thank you, Maya.
Yeah, thanks for that, Maya. I mean, I've been thinking a lot, of course, the last couple of days about the First Amendment and its relationship to authority and how authority exercises free speech and the limits of free speech and the whole Twitter thing. And I think that that's, you know, drawing lines and saying, you know, what is acceptable and what's not, and being very clear about it. Yeah, we need to do that. So I also very struggle with this, and thanks, Ian, for your words. I was struck by your use of trauma. I think that's something that we don't think about a lot with reactions and how people come to the place that they're in. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you, Shannon.
Perhaps one more question or comment?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks, Ian. I really enjoyed your presentation. Really mirrors a lot of thoughts. I really like your references with Hannah Arendt too. Just a really thoughtful, heartfelt presentation. I really appreciate that. The only thing I would add is, and I think it's really in line with what you're talking about, and I think about this with Arendt too. I think when it comes down to our personal authority, we have the authority for yes or no every instant. And a lot of that's unconscious. And I've really been thinking about how do people receive who I am and how I'm approaching them? Do they receive that as a yes or no? And if they receive what I'm putting out as a no, it doesn't matter a whole lot what I say or what I try to accomplish. So the thing I'd add to the what do you do is I'm trying really hard, and it's difficult to just see people first before I, as Bruce said, open my mouth and look in the mirror a little bit to see, am I coming from yes or am I coming from no, in a relative to my position with whoever I'm talking with. And that's, that's across the street or across the world or across the dinner table. And that's helping me some now, but I think my hunch is we've got a ways to go. I know I do, but I really appreciated what you had to say, and thank you.
Thank you too, Cal. That's helpful.
So thanks
I
again.
need to say that I really appreciate that yes or no kind of thing. it feeds into, I'm not very good at monitoring my nonverbal communication because I kind of quote unquote wear my heart on my sleeve a lot of the time. And I think it's really helpful to have that filter to consider where I'm coming from and verbally and non-verbally and behaviorally communicating no or yes.
Well, I feel like I'm not even good at monitoring my verbal communication, so I might have to just start with keeping my mouth shut sometimes. Thank you all so much.
You're in good company, Ian.
But
I
don't
think,
keep your mouth shut from us because we
okay.
we enjoy what you bring to us. It's a lot of good food for thought as we continue this month's theme of leadership and authority. And hopefully, as we continue the theme, we can explore the intersection between the political side of that and also bring in as well a spiritual lens. And I think these two things are compatible. So hopefully we'll have further enriching conversation and knowledge around authority and leadership. So we'll extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, thank you all so much.